morning, everyone. Good afternoon. All right. We're going to get started now for this week's seminar, and we have a great guest here that's going to give us another perspective on from the mobility side, Steve Raney. So Steve leads the joint venture Silicon Valley Smart Mobility Project. So he's going to tell you about that. But basically, he's involved with a whole series of activities, leading them down on the peninsula mostly, but hoping to spread it beyond there on how to reduce VMT and trips using software and new types of mobility services, and carrots and sticks. And I think that's what you're going to be talking about today, right? So he's been a little bit involved in automated autonomous vehicle studies for Nissan and Google in the past. He's been involved with some EPA studies, but this is the first time so I've known Steve for a while, but he holds the first peer-to-peer on-demand carpooling patent. That's pretty impressive. Congratulations on that. He has 3 master's degree, had to get a lot of that education here to do all these brilliant things he does. That's kind of a pitch to the students here to appreciate and value what. Yeah. So he has three graduate degrees in business, in software, and transportation from Columbia, RPI in Berkeley. He likes geographical diversity. Actually, I'm going to tell you one more thing, and then I have an announcement I just remembered I want to make. So when I got to know Steve many years ago, he was very involved in personal rapid transit. And so the company he was involved with actually he was head of the North American part of the company, but the other part of the company built the PRT at Heathrow Airport. So if anyone's ever used that, I keep looking for it there. I don't know where it is. Terminal 5. Every time I'm there, I try to find it. So anyway, Steve's been involved. He was a leader. He has been and actually still is a leader in PRT. But that's kind of his history. But the announcement I want to make, so, it's wonderful to have Steve here. He's a great speaker. You're going to enjoy him. It's really important. But I've got an even more important announcement. And that is yesterday, ITS Davis was awarded the National Center for Sustainable Transportation for the next 5 years. So Susan Handy gets most of the credit. She's the PI for it. She did a lot of the writing. And it's our partners, as some of you know, are Georgia Tech, USC, UC Riverside, University of Vermont, and Cal State Long Beach. So this will be continuing funding for 5 years. So we're going to be sitting down and thinking about how do we expand, build our programs here. So you're part of something really big and good and exciting. But even more exciting in the moment right now is Steve Raney. So Steve, this is all yours. Thank you. Okay. Hopefully that's hitting the mic. Okay. Welcome everybody. So the goal is to reduce Bay Area commuting by 25%, so super ambitious goal. And instead of calling it TDM or Transportation Demand Management, I like to use CTR for commute trip reduction. It's just a little more descriptive term. So we need to set the policy context first, then talk about the solution, and then give some ideas for enactment. So let's dig in.
I have my first question.
Yeah.
Is that really commute trip reduction 25% across all modes, in particular single occupant vehicles?
Single occupancy vehicles. So cut SOV from 75% to 50%. Yeah. And the project is called the Bay Area Fair Value Commuting Demonstration. We just won an FDA Mobility on Demand Sandbox grant. City of Palo Alto is the prime, and I'm the PI on it.
Down below, we have a big stack of partners on this project. The purple ones are employers that are going to pilot our fair value commuting solution. And then we have some vendors, some agencies, some nonprofits and so forth that round out our team. It's a really great team. And there were 78 applications, 11 were awarded, and 2 of the projects are going to present at TRB, including ours. And what FTA staff is telling us is that we're differentiated because we have a self-funding, self-sustaining business model, and typically in the FTA world, you're looking at something that's always requiring an ongoing subsidy, whereas this is differentiated compared to that. So on the policy context, let's talk about auto-centered places like Silicon Valley and contrast them with transit-loving places like Helsinki. So in the first 3 rows, Helsinki has half as much SOV, single occupancy vehicle, 12 times more transit, and 4 times more biking and walking. And so I've circled 76% SOV there because never in the history of the United States suburbia have we ever made a dent in anything like that. So we've never gone from like 76% to 70%. So you should be skeptical with what I'm about to tell you in terms of a solution, because there's no template for how to do that. And then I've also circled parking costs and gas price because Helsinki has $8 a gallon gas and they charge for parking, and you know, Silicon Valley is really underpriced in terms of driving, and that's why congestion is so bad. And at the bottom, I call out San Francisco is really being much more like Helsinki than Silicon Valley, with similar commute mode split to Helsinki. And downtown San Francisco has 9% single occupancy vehicle commute mode share. So it's just, you know, $20 a day to park downtown. You'd be crazy to do that. So really distinct from the rest of the car-loving U.S. So the starting point for our project is Stanford's Commute program. So they have permit parking, but it equates to about $3 a day if you drive alone. So it's your SOV fee. They take that money and they rebate it to non-SOV. So carrot and stick. And talk about gap filling. If you've got a commute from point A to point B, sometimes you don't have very good options, and so we like to inject things like the Stanford injects their Marguerite private bus system, electric bikes, electric scooters, and on-demand ride sharing. I mean, I think there's good news in terms of better commute options being available to folks. And down at the bottom, so I've got a picture of electric scooter as being your first and last mile to Caltrain commuter rail. There's their Marguerite bus, and then there's an electric bike by Gen Z. And Stanford's results, their SOV went from 75% to 50%, and they avoided $107 million worth of adding new parking structures. So they're really heroes in terms of commute trip reduction. And their public and private transit ridership went way up as well. So great success story. Yeah? It was a pretty long period of time. I have a reference in a PowerPoint, but certainly you should think 10 years. And then I'll show a scheme on how you can kind of squeeze a little bit every 3 months. And then you want to think about whether I'm credible in my narrative for that versus the 10-year switch, right? If you can reduce demand, it's amazingly cost effective. So in terms of the cost per ton of greenhouse gas reduced is negative $558 per ton, right? Because it's giving all these societal benefits at no cost. Okay, so it's an outlier in terms of what we like to do from public policy as opposed to something that's expensive per ton. So now we're looking at the policy context. We want a price to reduce VMT. The bottom table there shows 2 state plans and 2 Bay Area policies. They're essentially calling for a per capita VMT reduction of 15% while doubling transit use and doubling biking. So, you know, this is a real outlier in the U.S., this kind of thinking. It's both to protect the climate and also to reduce traffic congestion. Okay, so these are great adopted policies, difficult to achieve, outliers everywhere. Never been accomplished, so again, you should be skeptical of this, and 95% of the U.S. gets free parking at work, which is really a big indication of autocentricity. And pricing is really politically radioactive. So the draft California Transportation Plan 2040 came out, and it was proposing a 16-cent per mile fee, VMT fee, or road user charge, RUC, and that's equivalent to roughly a $4 a gallon gas tax hike. They were going to phase this in, and they were saying stop adding new freeway lanes and convert the leftmost lane on all freeways to HOV3, so three-person carpools. So that was in the draft, and that did not appear in the final, just an indication of what happens when politics get to things, right? So it's really sensitive to bring up any of this stuff. A really interesting thing is happening in Silicon Valley, nowhere else in the US. It's called trip caps. And so, for example, Apple wants to build their donut-shaped campus. In exchange for the development right to build that, they agreed to have much lower SOV commuting than the areas surrounding. So these are for big new campuses. These trip caps are being imposed. 4 different cities have imposed them. Facebook has one. And way back, and nothing had happened in trip caps for 20 years until you can go all the way back to Stanford had one imposed in '89. So nowhere else in the US. And there's some real teeth in some of these. If Facebook, for each trip they go over their cap, it's a $50 per day fine. So that adds up quick. And a key bit of technology that's really supportive of implementing trip caps is called Enterprise Commute Trip Reduction software made by Loom and Ride Amigos, who are key partners on our project. So what you want is a daily dashboard of how your commute mode went for all your commuters, how much SOV, how much transit, and so forth. So you want to see if you're trending towards your trip cap or you're doing well and trending away from it. And then the employer has this, and they can then present that to their city that has imposed this trip cap on them so they can transparently know how things are going. And this is a killer Internet of Things smart city application. Key is to detect what commute mode people are taking. It's a great bit of technology that is key in all of this. And with the Enterprise Commute Trip Reduction software, you can add carrots and sticks and run them through payroll processing. So an enterprise app is something that's going to have, each employee is going to get a view of this for what their commute options are, but also then the employer has everything rolled up for the dashboard for all of employee commuting. Also, as policy context, the Bay Area has the #2 worst traffic congestion after LA in the US, and we think the end of free workplace parking is inevitable. We surveyed some experts a few months ago, and 75% of them thought that one employer was going to start charging for parking within the next 24 months. So we're getting close to this tipping point just because traffic is so bad and real estate prices are such that it's kind of crazy to give away free parking. And now for context, we want to look at the political viability of pricing measures, because it's not really that useful to talk about something that has no chance of passing. And we're talking about pricing to change behavior, as opposed to on the bottom there in kind of blue is HOT managed lanes, which doesn't really change behavior. It just allows you to get into the managed lane if you're an SOV. So I should explain the column. So I have political viability. And if it's something that affects all VMT, then that's a per capita VMT reduction. Or on the right of that, it says the impact on mode share for a commuting SOV rate. If it's just something, a pricing policy that just impacts commuting. And then some things you can implement at a state level, and some things you would roll out first in a city, then the region, then you could roll it out to state level 1, 2, 3 like that. So that's what those 3 columns to the right are. So in red, I've got this $5 a gallon gas tax, which has no political viability. But the Moving Cooler report initially came out in 2009 and was talking about a 20-year phase-in of a big gas tax increase, and that would reduce per capita VMT by 28%. And Moving Cooler was in the context of climate protection, was how they were thinking on that. And so if we were a Vulcan species rather than a human species, we would be more logical, and we would just go ahead and implement that. And we would have done that a long time ago, right? But we are not. So the two things in red are sort of the things that the Vulcans would have done by now, but they haven't, I think. And what scored reasonably well on political viability was implementing pay-as-you-drive auto insurance, and a good state version of that can cut per capita VMT by 8%. And this fair value commuting, Stanford carrot and stick thing, which can cut SOB commuting by 25%. And that scores pretty well on political viability as well. Still going to be a heavy lift politically, but it seems to have some traction. And certainly a combination of carrots and sticks are a lot more popular with humans than just sticks. We have basically a paper on that. So it was a Delphic process with 5 experts, and we basically gave scores to things and then gave our justification for the scores, so we learned from everybody else. And so we did that process with Rebecca Long, who was MTC's ledge analysis analyst, I guess is how you would call that, and Michael Cunningham, Vice President of Transportation for Bay Area Council, and Federal Highway Administration's Alan Greenberg. So some pretty smart people were opining on that stuff. Then we also ranked on social equity, ease of implementation, greenhouse gas reduction, traffic congestion reduction. So you can imagine ranking on multiple dimensions and creating a weighted average so that you could pick the best policy in some rational public policy way. Yes? Yeah, so essentially, the managed lanes are in conflict with adopted state policy, which is basically trying to increase occupancy. Right? If you think about that, so that was the real push and the real insight. And so HOT managed lanes are great for generating some new revenue because we're in a big revenue shortfall in transportation as well. So there's reasons for adopting that. But essentially, the state vision at one point was to get 3 people or more in that leftmost lane, rather than lowering below 2.0 as your average because of all these people who are buying their way into that lane. And then the other policies in yellow, they're tough politically too. But potentially the state could really crank up the cap and trade so that the price per carbon was really high, and then that would be reflected in gas prices. That's another way to raise gas prices, and cordon charges and so forth. So that was political context. There's a need to reduce traffic congestion. And then an employer-focused solution is fair value commuting, comprised of 5 different components. So let's go through them. So the first 2 and the fourth are technologies. And the third is sort of the key policy. So moving from the left, we've got enterprise commute chip reduction software, and I've got a slide coming up on that. But we're trying to automate running an employer commute program. And then MobAg is a mobility aggregation smartphone app, so it's a single app that replaces your car. So if you think about that, you'd have an idea of what kind of feature set you would want in that killer app. I've got a slide coming up on that. The fee bait is what Stanford's doing. You have a fee on SOV, collect that money and distribute it to non-SOV. And by gap filling, we're injecting some new and better commute options for people. And we think this solution is currently at about 40% mature, and we want to scale it up to closer to 100% over the next 24 months. And digging into enterprise commute chip reduction, if you're an employee, you get this calendar and you fill it in with what commute mode you took. So you biked on Monday, you took the bus on Tuesday, and you biked on Wednesday, and so on and so forth. So everybody looks at this and says, can't you automate that? I don't have to spend 60 seconds per week filling that out. And so we think that's a key technology to make this work. It's having essentially your smartphone track you and figure out what mode you took. And there's a lot of work in that space. It's really hard, but we think it's solvable. And again, so each employee has this calendar that they're filling out, or it's automatically being filled in on them, and then the entire enterprise gets all that data rolled up, so you have a dashboard of how your company did in commuting.
I feel like there is an app that exists right now.
No, I mean, there's nobody's, sort of our goal is 98% accurate, and nobody's close to 50% accurate right now, as far as I know. But there's a lot of work going on that. And one of the apps now guesses and basically gives you a notification. Here's what we guessed, and then you can either say, yes, that's right, or correct it. So it's kind of a learning sort of thing.
What is that?
It's in beta. I can't say right now, unfortunately. It's driving me crazy. The second solution in the 5 components is the MobAg, or Mobility Aggregation app. There's a whole bunch of these. Urban Engine just got acquired by Google, which is interesting. BMW invested in MoveIt. GoLA is by Xerox. Ventra is Cubic and Movil is owned by Daimler. So there's some big companies in this space. So if you think about what you want in this one app, so you want Lyft and car sharing and public transit, all these things in a single app. A key use case is you want to have it give you the perfect 3-mode trip from San Francisco to Google, where you're taking Lyft line to Caltrain to bike share, and it pre-books everything for you, gives you one price, and make sure you make your connections and so on and so forth, and then you pay for Caltrain with your smartphone. Right? That's the vision, and we're pretty far from that right now. I think it's going to get there. And then gap filling, good news on the innovative modes front, going from sort of left on the bottom to right on the top. Electric bikes, Scoop peer-to-peer ride sharing. I love those electric scooters for first last mile to Caltrain. Bridge and Chariot, private sector microtransit. There's a telecommuting fixture, and of course Google robotaxis are coming as well. And so that was the solution. Now let's talk about how you might enact this and scale this up Bay Area wide. So we're going to pilot this with 11 employers and then create this narrative about how you scale it up from there. So we have some great partners, and our 11 employers have about 27,000 employees between them. And the notion is we're going to try to advance each of the 5 components bit by bit until they get better and better. And the key deliverables we have is a dashboard that's aggregated across all 11 employers that using 2 different apps to report that out. And then every so often we're going to have our consortium get together and draw a conclusion. How mature is this solution? How is it moving from 40% to 100%? So we have those trip caps on big new Apple donut-shaped campuses. How do you expand that to existing offices? So it's great that we have these trip caps in the 4 cities. So we want to be able to impose a citywide sliding trip cap on medium and big-sized firms. And you don't want to shock the transportation system, so you want to phase this in gradually. So you might ask for 80% SOV mode share from an employer in month 0, easy to hit. And then you reduce it by 2.5% every 3 months. So again, this is the 2-year version of what Stanford did in 10 years, or the 3-year version of what Stanford did in 10 years. So you're basically setting this performance-based objective, and the employer has to hit it however they want to do it, so they have a lot of flexibility. And then if they're non-compliant, then they get to implement fair value commuting with carrots and sticks, and that's a no-cost option to the employer that will shift mode. So it's not onerous on them, and that's key to get to the 50% vote rather than a supermajority vote. And the required SOV fee would go up by 25 cents every 3 months. So you don't want to start charging $3 a day. You want to start charging 25 cents per day. Again, you want to gradually change behavior. So you're picking off the people with the best commute options first, and then you gradually change behavior. Yeah. Be applied on all employers that are in that city that have 250 employees in that city or more. Right, exactly. And then there's a prisoner's dilemma where one city doesn't want to do that because they don't want to have the first mover disadvantage. And so what you can do potentially is get 4 cities to hold hands and jump in together simultaneously. So The image is four little kids who are afraid of the cold water. They hold hands and they jump in together because it's less scary than if they jumped in by themselves. It's not an ice skating rink. It feels like it's freezing. It's 34 degrees. Sort of finishing up this thought on an enactment, I'm not going to go too far into this, but just to say that, typically in planning we have stakeholder processes, and you want to make groups of stakeholders happy, and there's 6 key stakeholder groups that you want to make happy in this. You want to make the cities, the small employers, the big employers, the transit agencies, sort of the mobility services like Lyft, and the enterprise commute to production vendors all happy. And currently, none of them are happy in terms of commuting. And with this solution, you've got something for everybody. So the key thing is you want to create these, ideally you want to create a 6-way win that makes everybody happy. And we have this narrative where we say we can. So, thank you very much for listening to the Fair Value Commuting spiel.
I just have a question on clarification. I think it's a really interesting and neat concept, and I just want to understand sort of status quo versus where it's going. Am I understanding it correctly that currently it's sort of a voluntary pilot project in San Mateo, and then are you looking at it as potentially something that multiple cities will adopt as regulation, or is it state bill, or is there a path, or are you kind of exploring where it could go?
We have one political narrative that is credible. You could pitch to a skeptic and they say, that's not too bad. I could see that happening. And you can imagine it, it's going to have all sorts of twists and turns. Some key things that I think will happen in the pilots will be that the pilots will move as a first step to what's called a transportation stipend, where, for instance, the city of Mountain View will give each of their staff $4 a day for transportation, and if they park underground an SOV, it costs $4. So they're not worse off, but they get this notion that there's a price on parking. But if they bike or they take a scooter or transit, then they get that $4. That's a all carrot, no stick option. And maybe as part of that, we get City of Mountain View to charge 25 cents per day for SOV, which in the last 20 years, that's a big deal because nobody's done that. Right? So it's sort of the Trojan horse, get your foot in the door, and then you can scale up from there. And then a lot of the Silicon Valley cities politically, traffic is their number one issue politically. Like the councils say, traffic's the first thing. And so those 4 cities could ask their assembly member for a state bill that enables them to do a pilot, and then it would come back and give them the chance to pass an ordinance to mandate that on a pilot period.
The state bill enables the city regulation.
Yeah. And the key is the state legislature, 50% simple majority, not a supermajority, because we don't have that anymore in California. And the state legislature is sympathetic to cities that ask for enabling legislation when the state has given the SB 375 targets for VMT reduction, right? It's very reasonable for the state to do that. And then, especially if the state says, something that's for the Bay Area, right? Because that's sort of the innovative place that's more willing to do that than, say, the Central Valley. So if you can pass the state legislation, but say it's only for the Bay Area, that's very helpful as well.
I have a question about needed given quite high, and student populations. $4 a day might make more of a
We have just general U.S. price elasticity of demand. A few examples like Stanford. You think about the super high income tech workers as being less sensitive to that. Also, they're working till midnight, so you're not going to get everybody, most definitely. And yet, Google has super low commute mode share. They have 50% SOV. I mean, they run their own private bus network, but it's interesting. I think you can motivate the high-income tech workers to get out of their car because it's really lousy to drive, right? And it's not productive time, and especially a lot of people like to live in San Francisco and work in Mountain View. So they're picking the least worst option. So you can get something where, I think everybody sort of likes the notion of the Google bus, Wi-Fi, comfortable seat, is a lot better than driving alone. So there's sort of that aspect to it. And then another key thing is we can have a longer discussion about social equity impacts, right? We don't want to be hammering low-income folks. Right? So,
I wondered how you actually track
so
or does Stanford have cameras everywhere?
Stanford does not have the enterprise commute to production software yet where you're self-reporting. And so there's this sort of, the question is sort of like, well, how many people will cheat?
That was the thing you were saying with your calendar, where
Yeah.
you say what you're going to do.
Yeah.
But carpooling single occupant would seem to me
Yeah, and Stanford will reinforce that because they have single occupancy vehicle commuters who park in the carpool spaces. Right? So they have a perceived enforcement issue where they run really accurate mode detection. And then sort of one question is, like, if you're just going to voluntarily self-report, how many people cheat? And if you survey humans, they say, oh, I'm not going to cheat, but everybody else is going to cheat. I think it gets to be one of these situations where you have high reputation risk for a low gain on this. If you get caught cheating, then everybody kind of looks down on you. So it's something that prevents me from cheating in situations where I might be drawn in. But sort of I think Stanford is really helping to drive the feature set requests where you want to have 98% accurate automated commute mode detection. So you take the guesswork out of it. Right? So a little bit invasive, but kind of necessary. I like to call that big sister rather than big brother because you're helping the climate and reducing traffic congestion.
But that commute mode detection wouldn't work for how many people are in the car.
So that's key, right? Is figuring that out. So you might have to bump your smartphones to validate it, but it may be that two sensor streams sampled every 5 minutes along the commute are the exact same. So it's a gyroscope, accelerometer, and GPS location, right? Who knows, right? I mean, maybe somebody can be smart enough to get that. And over here.
Curious, I think that it makes a lot of sense actually when we talk about these smaller firms, service industry,
Right. So the enterprise software is also pretty good at, if you've got a job center with a bunch of jobs, with a bunch of small employers, you can put a lasso around that and provide everybody with sort of a single point of entry from a software standpoint. And that would be under sort of this context, that would be a voluntary thing, but presumably you get better commute options, so there's some motivation to adopt that. And then the other thing is we're pretty explicit in the way we envision the implementation of it being 9 to 5 employees. So we're not trying to hammer on part-time baristas. So, 9 to 5 employees, there's a definition for that. So it tends to be slightly higher income folks. That's sort of part of how we're dealing with all that.
because that could make a difference for some users, right? Lower data plan.
For automated commute mode detection?
Yes.
Yeah, so you just want to, it's like a Moves app or Apple Health app is detecting when you walk. It's just detecting more modes. Strava for biking, right, is the same sort of thing that detects your biking. So you're just getting more and more sophisticated on that. And then the mobility aggregation figures out, okay, you're at work now. Here's what your mode was. And then it's just one quick message to the enterprise app that's got a report there. Right? So low data bandwidth on that. But in actually doing the algorithms, what the concern is you're going to use too much battery to figure out what mode people took.
How sure are you that there
Yeah, exactly, right. So Don Shoup's research and regulation 15 implementation in the early 90s showed that when there aren't very good options, everybody starts carpooling. And so the stuff that happened in Southern California just made carpooling take off. So that got the biggest mode shift. If you look at Stanford's commute program, from 0 to 5 miles, there's a lot of active transportation, a lot of biking. They're doing great there. 10 to 20 miles, there's a lot of transit. If also you look at the geographic distribution, if you're over in the East Bay, the only option you have is carpooling, but carpooling is doing pretty well from like 30 miles out or 20 miles out there. So there's a decent story. And their worst area is commutes from 5 to 10 miles out, which driving is just really quick compared to everything else. And so and Google has a big commute program too, and they've been experimenting with electric bikes as a way to extend biking distance. And typically it's pretty fast compared to driving alone. And of course, Americans are really wimps as soon as it gets to be winter, right? It's kind of sad compared to Helsinki.
So what you just said makes me think data should be great because we don't have it 5 to 10 miles out. We're like a 5-mile radius town, and then the nearest other thing is 10 miles.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know, maybe you know what share of the SOV travel in this city is coming in from like Sacramento's and Woodlands versus Virginia and Davis. But,
majority of it is coming from outside?
that's my perception. But it's all coming in off the highways.
Yeah, and right. So like University of Washington, the staff commuting behavior is really bad, and the students are super green.
Well, I think that's
It's like it's
pretty
like
true here.
40% SOV delta at Berkeley. The professors get the gold-plated parking passes, and the students. It's interesting how we treat students worse than like tech workers, right? Students we hammer on parking charges, whereas tech workers oh, I get free parking. What's wrong with that?
Lou, the other people are
Other people?
well, another large group.
Well, but that's exactly, I think, relevant. And so when we think about our community and when we think about these things, I wonder whether $4 is really going to, of course, if you're driving kids around, you probably get at least your carpool for a while. I don't know how that gets.
No, it's really hard to solve the getting the kids to school tends to generate a lot of SOV, and then people have a lot of kit in their car for their gym workout or whatever. Or kayaking after work is the same thing, right? I mean, really hard to solve that problem, right? So in the best case, we're talking about getting to 50% SOV, so still half the people are driving alone. There's somebody over there.
So the Bay Area
Don't quote me on it, but it's 0.3% mode shift. Okay, so the Bay Area Commuter Benefits Ordinance is essentially the same legislative scheme, and it mandates the employers with 50 or more employees pick one of 4 options. One option, which is that you have payroll commuter benefits where you can buy transit passes with pre-tax money. And capitalist companies always pick the easiest one that it affects behavior less, which is option 1, which is the pre-tax commuter benefits, right? And so the good news is Bear is really scaling up, installing this enterprise software for computer benefits, and then this enterprise commute chip reduction software is just that on steroids, right? It's got that payroll processing, but other stuff as part of it. So it's really helpful for that to set the groundwork. So again, super virtuous, not enough behavior change for what we need, right? I think is a good way to say, and pioneered in the Bay Area, right? Mandated in the Bay Area. So virtue, 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 not enough result.
I'm wondering about the engagement with work schedule flexibility. I'm eligible, so
Yeah, very much so. So we're, you're envisioning this, your idealized tech worker window is you've got meetings from 10 to 4, and then you've got flexibility in the morning and flexibility in the evening. You still have to work, 20 hours per day, but you can do a lot of your programming at home, right? It's sort of that notion, you're imagining, a big cultural shift where the employers should get with the program, and the employees are asking for better options, and everybody's beginning to negotiate things a little bit differently and a little bit more humane. And in the Bay Area, the tech employers, one of their top issues is employee retention because of the bad traffic on Highway 101, and so they want a fix. So exec staff wants a fix for that, and so that is a great thing that we can surf behind that need, but maybe the tech employers are going to have to alter schedules a little bit, but they get the benefit that they retain more employees, which is a bigger economic impact for them. So hopefully.
Factor in the some of that.
Yeah, very much so, right? So I have this bad idea, which is a robo-van picking up kids, and you have a secure chain of custody, and dad can have a FaceTime chat with a kid while the kid's in the vehicle, and the vehicle is locked, and you get to the elementary school, and then there's a teacher there who has a secure way of opening the door, and you're basically guaranteed that a safe person opens the door, and no mugger hops in the car and so forth, right? But it gets to be kind of involved to do that. But the point is, there's a need to solve that problem, right? And get kids to school. It used to. Another solution was like a bike. That was huge when I was growing up. It was a great solution.
I do not live in a gated
I know,
community. There is a software app where the kids have a tag, and somebody in the school has a smartphone. So when the kids tag the smartphone, the parents get a message that the kids are at school.
Right, you got Find My Friends on your iPhone, where you can stalk your kid too. So that's good too, right? So you can imagine kind of all that coming together, right? And there's a real need for that.
I heard that I think it was the city of San Mateo was piloting the program with students to actually pay anyone to work but I haven't actually been able to find anything about that.
So one thing is peer-to-peer carpooling seems like this killer app, right? So many empty seats in vehicles. Why can't we just match everybody? And there were like 15 attempts at this that failed in the past. And Scoop, by some measures, has succeeded. They've got at least 75 people per day for Cisco North San Jose. Cisco North San Jose has 15,000 people, and Cisco subsidizes that to help motivate people to carpool. But that's far from Scoop being profitable in that. And they may have gone further than that. But But the point being, I think that if we change the demand pattern, so you get a bunch of people who want an alternative to SOV, then all of a sudden they're like, Scoop has great technology, and people are going to start using that. So I think that could, Shoup's results from the early 90s would say that there's a pent-up capability to carpool. And you think you get a better carpooling experience with Scoop than what people had to do in LA in the past. So I'm optimistic on that, but I think fundamentally you've got increased demand for non-SOV is the key thing.
Many of the partner companies and organizations that you mentioned are participating in this pilot have GHG targets and environmental targets, and so I'm wondering if there has been interest. It seems like this is mostly focused on, did you drive or not? Is there any interest in sort of doing some further GHG accounting? How far is your commute? What car do you drive? Is that something you guys might look to integrate or provide some valuation changes in the future?
Yes, and the Loom software that's running in Seattle already does that, and they get your make and model of vehicles, so they've got an estimated mile per gallon, so they can calculate greenhouse gas for your commute. So it's a pretty nice detailed analytic that they provide you on greenhouse gas. So yeah, and then we committed to that as a deliverable on the grant, and then also an accounting of the carrots and sticks, which I mean you essentially have to do that, but that's going to be interesting to watch. Right. So let's think of UberX as leading to Google Robotaxi, right? It's kind of the same app without a driver, right? There, in the car-loving places, there's not much demand for UberX right now. Right? So you'll have, like in Palo Alto, you'll have 10 vehicles circulating around. I mean, so what? It's not moving the needle. Maybe 1 out of 1,000 trips in suburbia is, if you're lucky, is going by Lyft and Uber. So for their business model, something that shifts demand like this can really improve it a lot. And so I think that's the precursor to making the robotaxi business model work as well. I mean, I see those two as birds of a feather. And then if you think of Chariot and Bridge as vans morphing into robo-vans, I tend to think of a hierarchy from having looked at some of the financial parameters. So robotaxis kind of circulating on 5 mile or less trips, and then I think a robo-van is pretty sweet for line haul. So typical U.S. motor coach bus transit costs $1.01 per passenger mile in the U.S., so it's losing a lot of money. If you could have a robo-van that was running at 25 cents per passenger mile, then you could run public transit at profit. That's a perpetual motion machine, so you can just scale the heck out of it all over the place. Then we have to provide guaranteed minimum income for all those drivers, obviously. Yeah, exactly, right. So that can really help.
Some are even closed from dusk until dawn, and some places are
Yeah, very much so. And there's so many dimensions to that question. So we're teamed with Google, and they've got an analytic tool that measures the perceived stress on your bike route at different points. So there's like in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of bad intersections that are unfriendly to bikes. And then they're providing matching grants to fix those intersections. So that's a really good thing, is identifying the bad spots and fixing them. And the other thing we're seeing in the Bay Area is this arms race between cities on who can have the best bike plan. So I think it's relatively inexpensive for most investments to provide better bike lanes. Boy, we'd like them separated by, from the cars better than they are. But I mean, it's getting to be twice as good as that. So I think that's part of enabling, the low-hanging fruit of biking and stopping Americans from being so lame about how little they bike when they should, right? Is going that step. So I think, from what I see, a lot of good news coming on biking. Then electric bikes, lengthening that distance for people. The notion on that is for that 8-mile commute, maybe you don't want to sweat on the way in, so it's a sweat-free commute on the way in, but maybe you want to work out on the way out, and it's a good workout to go back, so something like that. I'm pretty bullish. And then, we have an appendix in the white paper, this 200-page white paper here on the drop-off in winter biking. Okay, so it gets dark and it gets cold, and Americans are wimps. And then you see these pictures of these grandmas in skirts in 0-degree weather in Copenhagen, and they've got spikes on their bike tires, and they're like, look, this is the expectation. This is the social norm, right? Just amazing. And they're like, in some of these northern European cities, they'll plow the bike paths before the roads. It's just like, oh, it's so great, for commuting. Toughening up Americans, changing the cultural expectation, allow you to have helmet hair at work, allow you to smell a little. I have a helmet for allow you to smell a little bit worse at work. Would be helpful. All these social norms. And even going so far as like I've got this really obnoxious LED bike vest. It's like makes me the brightest person on a bike at night. You can't miss me. You think I'm like goofy, but that's the point. So multi-dimension.
Have you tried an electric assist bicycle?
Yeah, I tried the Gen Z. Yeah. And you did research analysis thereon?
Oh no. So actually, this was. I've ridden the Gen Z before, but also Bosch. Let several of the students, try it out for a week.
So good stuff. Yeah, and I think really optimistic about price performance, just going through the price curve and getting cheaper and better. So $1,500 for a decent electric bike going down to $1,000 I think is really helpful. Electric scooter there's a foldable electric scooter that I use, so it goes on Caltrain. Going down from 1,000 to maybe like 500 would be really sweet and would really help open up the market as well.
How big are the wheels on that?
They're the big Razor as opposed to the small Razor. Yeah, at 200 pounds, I have an issue with like causing flats when I go on bumpy stuff.
Curious why the target the employer firm level for this debate idea for SOB seems like a lot of it's like organizational levels that might be really great. Think about that, including thinking about it when you're talking about managed lanes as well. So I'm just curious why employers?
Right. So Gil has got his analysis on sort of creating the economically most rational way for any trip you take, having all the negative externalities included in it so you get the right price for your trip and the right pricing signals. And so I think we kind of agree that theoretically that's what you should have. And then I'm sort of working on what are short-term politically viable strategies. And building on the Bay Area Commuter Benefits Ordinance and things like that. So I don't think this is your idea. Again, I think if we were Vulcans, we'd have $8 a gallon gas, but we're humans, and so we have $3 a gallon gas. And so, yeah, exactly. So this is it's the short-term art of what's possible, right? I don't think this is the most economically rational pricing. I think Gil's working on that. Right. Yeah, but there's this ideal pricing mechanism, right? That the Socratic ideal, right, which has nothing to do with an employer commute program. And then if you're in Europe, the employers aren't sucked into commuting so much. But in the U.S., because of the pre-tax benefit, the employers are really sucked into commuting. So they're already partway there.
Maybe outside of your range, but I was wondering, cities could put a
Yeah, exactly. And we also talked about if you could, like in an office park, if you could prove that you had permanently reduced demand for 1,000 parking spaces, and then you could get some tradable development rights, and they'll go add a new building somewhere. So you could monetize that virtue would be sweet, and that would really add up fast. I mean, that would be sweet. So maybe the powerful real estate developers, like in Bayer, it's like Sobrato and Irvine Company, we can get behind that. And then they can exploit that, and then we get their government relations people taking the lead on things with their power rather than a schmoes. That would be sweet. Be a good trade-off. You know, and I mean, gosh, all these surface parking spaces, let's infill them, right? With affordable housing. Sweet, let's do it.